Awesome. Well, cool, man. Yeah, how have things been? I haven't talked to you in a while. I feel like the last time we saw each other, I guess it's been a few years now.
Since actually like seeing each other for sure. I think we jumped on a call. It feels like not that long ago, but it's that whole like COVID time void of
Right.
what is time anymore? How long ago was that actually? But yeah, it's been a minute. You've moved around a bunch. I think I've moved around a bunch since we last talked.
Yeah,
So
you were in San Francisco, I think, and now you're in Atlanta, right?
yeah, made the jump back to the East Coast. Partially like personally motivated. My wife's family's in Alabama, my family's in Pennsylvania. Just being in the same time zone as at least one of our families in one time zone away is a little bit better. But the company that I currently work for is largely overseas based, which means working with them from West Coast was just really brutal on work-life balance. It was like morning meetings, evening meetings, work time during the day, and just no balance. So it was a simultaneous kind of personal and work motivated move at the same time. But we've been loving Atlanta. We moved really quickly. We found out basically right before Thanksgiving, 2 years ago now, that we were basically permitted to move, and we moved in December. So
Oh, wow.
mid-December,
Yeah,
yeah,
that's
we
fast.
we hit the eject button mostly because we had a lease that was coming up and the timing made sense, but also because my CEO was like, "Yeah, you can do that, but like don't wait, like make it happen. Don't like let anything disrupt. Like if it's going to be the holidays is like the right time, then move." And we're like, "Yeah, it's probably going to be the right idea." So we really just did hit the eject button on California and came back East Coast. So, but it's been good. It's been good.
Nice. That's awesome. I feel like that's the way to do it, is just to kind of like pull the Band-Aid off and make it happen as quick as possible, and then
Mm.
it's done and over with, as opposed to like dragging things out and you're flying back and forth and whatever else. Especially, yeah. Do you unpack fast as well?
Personally, no. My wife is a
Okay.
project manager, so she is hyper organized. She had manifest list of like every box that we had in a container and all these
Oh,
different
wow.
things. So that stuff came off of those containers and into the house. And kitchen got unpacked like right away. Her office got unpacked right away. Living room, dining room unpacked right away. My office, some stuff is still in boxes. The garage, some stuff is still in
Oh,
boxes.
yep.
So I'm probably the worst when it comes to that. Like, I don't have a place for it yet, so it can just stay in the box. And then I'll need it for
Yes.
something. I'll be like, where did I leave that?
Right, exactly. Yeah, it always ends up being, yeah, exactly. Like that niche tool or some photo or frame, or it's just something that's fallen by
Usually for
the
me, it's
wayside.
some obscure tool that I only need
Right.
for like a rare project. It's like I have one of those. I know I do, but where?
Right. Yeah, exactly. But that's great. Was there a big cultural change with that as well? Because you were on the West Coast for a while.
Yeah, almost a decade in total. Um, in terms of cultural change, like moving back to like the South, like there were a lot of
Right.
expected things that I think we expected for like cultural change. Atlanta in general has just been kind of exploding in terms of diversity and like stuff that you
Mm.
can do here. Like even some stuff that's like so signature California, like the number of breweries and stuff like that. It's really
Right.
good in Atlanta. So there's a lot of stuff
Huh.
popping up. We in particular moved to an area in East Atlanta that there's like something like 86 restaurants within a mile of our house. And
Oh, wow.
that was like very familiar to California. One of the things that we loved about San Francisco was just the authenticity and diversity of the food options that we had there. It was always going to be good. We were going to have like the real thing there. And Atlanta's growing up to be a little bit of that as well. So there was overall like a really good fit. Still some, some culture shift and stuff like that, but also don't mind giving up the kind of rat race for finding lower rent constantly. Like we were in
Yeah.
California for almost a decade. I think we moved like 6 times. So
Yes.
it was just like a constant thing. And here we've been here for 2 years. The rent's not gone up, because we have a mortgage now. It's fixed, but
Right. Yeah,
the
yeah.
rent's not gone up. We haven't had to consider moving away. We haven't had to worry about the landlord finding our cats. All those like silly things that we were
Yep.
chasing that felt weird to chase as an adult, like to have to deal with that you get with living in the Bay Area. So don't miss that. Appreciate that culture shift that happened.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Yeah, I'm super happy for you, especially Yeah, the rental rates out there, I imagine, are nothing to laugh at. Excuse me.
Yeah, it was, I
Awesome.
mean, it was cheaper for us to get a house here than it was to rent there by a substantial amount. So it
Yeah,
ended up
I'm in the
working out.
same boat. We have a mortgage that is cheaper than like the lowest one bedroom rent I can even find in the surrounding area. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's tough out there. It's tough out there for sure. But yeah, so like to rewind back a little bit because we've met a couple times now and I feel like we've kind of had like I've heard like bits and pieces of your story, but I don't actually know the whole thing. You're originally from the South, right?
No, actually, I'm
Oh, okay.
originally from Pennsylvania, but coming out of high school and broken up relationships and stuff like that, it was like, oh, I need to get out of here. And at the time, like many industrial designers, I thought I wanted to be an engineer, and so I was looking at mechanical
Mm,
engineering and options for that. Got accepted to Drexel and a few others, and the costs were just something I couldn't afford. I came from a family that grew up pretty poor, and we didn't have a lot of money put together for college funds. There were four of us kids, and my older sister went to college, and there was kind of no options left for me. So it was like figure out scholarships and stuff like that. And so my mindset then shifted to okay, well I'll do like community college for my gen eds and stuff like that, and then I'll transfer somewhere. And as a part of that, started taking some like introductory engineering courses, started getting into programming, which full circle kind of is funny, but got into programming and was like, oh, this is not for me. Like this is not the direction I want to go. Engineering's probably actually not going to be the right fit. So like what is that I actually want? Like I thought I wanted to be an engineer. I guess I just want to be an inventor. What does that look like? Which I feel like is such a familiar story for industrial designers. Um, and it was actually my mom that discovered industrial design. She was like, I found this thing. It sounds like it's like a little bit art, a little bit engineering. I had never taken an art course in my life other than just like high school stuff. And so I was like, oh, maybe I'll take a college level art course. So I took some intro to design and intro to art. And I was like, this is actually kind of fun. And I need to get out of here. So that's when I moved and transferred to App State because they had a basically at the time a fledgling industrial design program, and it was affordable and it was not in Pennsylvania, so I could move away. So I made that jump to the South at the beginning of
right.
college time, basically.
Yeah, it's funny. I remember at App, because I was in a similar boat. I was like when I was doing my college search, I was kind of restricted to in-state tuition, which thankfully in North Carolina is extremely cheap. But I remember getting to App and hearing that story a lot. There were a lot of people who sort of had come down from the Northeast because in-state tuition, even within like New England or Pennsylvania, or just the general Northeastern region is so expensive that it was actually cheaper for people to pay out of state in the South, which I thought was kind of
Yeah, significantly
interesting.
so. Significantly so. And I know like
Yeah,
in-state was amazing for App State because I tried to get residency and couldn't prove that I really intended to stay there, which they were right. Um,
right.
but 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 I tried to get in-state because in-state was so good, but still the out of state was low enough that it was like a fraction of the cost for me to go to someplace like Drexel in Philadelphia, even though that was, in state. So
Yeah, yeah. It's funny too. It's funny. I had a similar experience. I took for when I was in high school, you could take electives online. So I went to like a very small high school, kind of in the middle of nowhere. So there weren't that many like classes that you could take other outside of like your gen ed. And one of them you could take online was programming. And I had the exact same reaction. I would think I was about a week into it, and I just had that visceral feeling of like it feels like there's a gap in communication between me and what it is I'm trying to do. Like I feel so disassociated and I just like could not wrap my mind around even like the most simple and basic concepts because I like for me this is like 2008 or so. And at that time even there was a lot of that talk going around of like there's going to be a lot of future jobs in tech and like programming is going to become is going to be a base knowledge that everyone needs to know. And it's I guess it's funny thinking now, but now that we're kind of seeing the tech industry beginning to fracture a little bit. But
mhm.
so you got to App State and you're a few years older than me, so the program must have been pretty new at that time. What was it, like 3 or 4 years old when you got there?
It was just a couple years old, and I think maybe like a good definition of how young the program was I think the graduating class above me, I think it had like 10 or 12 people in it.
Oh wow.
And that doubled, I think, the next year. Or no, sorry, not the class above me, but the class that graduated my first year there. Um, so they graduated with like maybe like 10 or 12 people, and of those 10 or 12, like maybe like one or two went into actual industry in terms of
Right.
industrial design. And then I think it like doubled the next year up into like the 20 range and stuff like that. And by the time I was going through, and probably by the time you were going through, they were in like the 30s. They actually had like vetting programs where you had to pass a certain level of your portfolio and stuff like that. So when I first started, though, they didn't have any of that. Well, it was part of the appeal.
Right.
Like I said, I didn't actually take any art courses prior to those two individual design and art courses that I took to try to even see if I wanted to do something like that. And so not having a portfolio of work, like I had not been like many of my classmates, I had not been drawing since I was like 5, and just you couldn't keep me out of my sketchbook thing. Like I didn't do that kind of stuff. So
Right.
I didn't have any portfolio to show. I didn't have any work. I just had, a base level of mechanical engineering and an interest in doing something else, which at the time was exactly the type of student that they allowed. Not anymore, but so it's a double-edged sword. Like I see the program now and I'm like, oh my goodness, I wish I was there during that time. Like the big deal when I was there was that we got our first 3D printer, and it was one of those like $40,000 FDM machines that never printed anything good. The quality was awful.
Right.
The supports were like fully fused to the model body, and you had to spend like 3 hours basically sanding the supports off. Like it was a big waste of time. So now looking, they have CNCs, they have 3D printers and laser cutters and all the shop equipment. It's like, oh man, I wish I could go back through that. But if that had been the program back when I tried to get into it, I probably wouldn't have made it.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, it's great to hear, and I think there's probably more people who still share that story than I think either of us would imagine, just because awareness around industrial design is so low, and it does like have that weird Venn diagram between like art and engineering. I would think that that's probably still the case with a
I
lot
mean,
of
I still see
incoming
posts like
students.
on like Reddit and stuff like that where people are like, I'm an engineer. Can I do industrial design? Like if you're actively an engineer now, like probably, but I mean, why would you want to if you're already in an industry and you're already an engineer? Like, if you want to do that kind of thing, just like make stuff.
Right. Yeah, for sure. Um, but awesome. So you attend apps, you kind of go through the 4 year program as immature and probably as fluid as it was back then, I would imagine. And then you basically, did you progress right to TTI from there?
It probably looks like that on paper, but there's basically a summer of panic in between.
Right.
Coming out of apps program, they were established enough that they recognized that internships were really important, and so part of the program was you needed a 6-week internship, and I couldn't find anything. Like it was coming out of a pretty bad job market at the time, on its way out, but still pretty bad. There wasn't a lot that was out there, and I remember
Yeah.
applying to stuff at like Whipsaw and stuff, like stuff in California that I probably had no right applying to, but just stuff that was like I'll apply to anything, and just not hearing back from anybody. And like my only prospect was like a UPenn robotics internship kind of thing. And I knew that there was a certain amount of establishment of like where you intern is kind of the trajectory that you set, at least to a certain extent, because it's the industry experience that you get right off the bat. And I was like, I don't know if robotics really makes the most sense for me. I'm gonna hold out and see if I can find something else over the summer. And then I had basically a gentleman's agreement with the App State faculty that if I couldn't find anything at that point, I had already worked with a couple companies on just like little contract projects, and they were like, you can probably go without the internship and just try to go straight to a job, and we'll give you a write-off if you can't find anything by the end of the summer. And basically at the very end of the summer, the TTI internship popped up, and it wasn't the standard
Oh
TTI
wow.
internship. It was actually the concept team's internship. And luckily, I had established some good networking relationships with them, specifically on the concept team, to the point that they had the opening come up and they sent me a message directly and said, "Hey, are you interested? We know you're looking." So it was almost 100% networking that I landed that. And the networking story is actually kind of funny. We had done, our tours and everything down there, but they had a skid of like foam cutoffs from all of their prototyping. And they were like, "Does any student want this?" And I basically ended up borrowing a classmate's Honda Element, driving down to South Carolina, having them load this
Oh,
skid
wow.
of offcuts from all their different prototypes and stuff like that, and then taking it back to school and then like selling it to the other students at a very reasonable price, but still enough that I was like able to pay my rent for a couple months off of it, stuff like that. But while I was there,
That's
obviously had
amazing.
had lunch with them, spent time with them, got to see a little bit deeper than the surface level tour. Um, and ultimately like ended up setting up those relationships with the people that ended up calling me and saying, "Hey, we have an internship coming up, do you want to apply?" I was actually on vacation in Atlanta at the time. My aunt and uncle live here. We were on vacation at the time visiting them, and I drove, oddly enough, through South Carolina, basically right past TTI, all the way back to Pennsylvania to get my like portfolio and resume and everything together, and then send it back to them for like a phone interview a couple days later. But yeah, so
Wow.
I ended up getting that. I moved down there, did my 6 weeks required for my degree, and then ended up staying there for an extra year.
That's amazing. That's super, that's so inspiring because if people don't know, like that is a long drive. Like that is a pain in the ass and an equation that probably makes no sense to drive like, I don't know, what is it, like 4 or 5 hours from like
Well,
Boone?
so from well, I was in Atlanta. I drove all the way back to Pennsylvania, and I think that was, I feel like 11 hours, maybe even
Oh,
12.
geez. Oh, so you're driving from Pennsylvania to TTI for the
Well,
for picking up the foam?
no. Okay. Yeah. Sorry. I was missing the context of the
Yeah,
dedication you're
yeah.
talking about. Yeah. From Boone to, I think, Anderson is maybe around 4 hours or so.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah,
far
which
enough that when I was living there and there was a conference in Atlanta, I told all the App State students, like, "Come crash at my place. Like, I've got an entire apartment." And they
yeah.
all came down, and we all like basically filled up my entire apartment with App State students, just breaking up the drive. But yeah, it was a long drive, but it was, for me, it was super worth it because I got like basically one-on-one time with obviously the team that ended up hiring me. So it was worth it for
Yeah.
me substantially, in more ways than one.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's really cool because yeah, I don't think most people would probably not make that drive, but obviously like, you reap what you sow, and if you put yourself out there and you kind of go that extra mile, then it pays off
Yeah. And I
to a
had that
certain degree.
specifically in mind when I went and got those offcuts, was like, this is my chance to basically get my foot in the door. I actually didn't plan that it would pan out as perfectly as it did,
Right.
but I'll take it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Of course you can't predict anything, but still like, it's I remember when we were at Pencil, like Dwayne used to always tell us that luck is when preparation meets opportunity. So like if you're
Exactly.
prepared and you put yourself out there and you do the best you can, then when the opportunity pops up, then you usually it will work out, or you get lucky. So yeah, that's amazing. So you get to TTI and ha, I know now, I don't know a lot about TTI. I know that now they have like a very large, robust industrial design team. Was it like that at the time when you joined, or
Um, I think at the time I would have considered it pretty robust. So they had a number of different segments of the business that did industrial design. The biggest was their concept center, or I think it was Concept Center International, CCI, acronyms everywhere. And that was a dedicated team for all of the different like TTI brands that would work on the industrial design of those programs. And so they had industrial designers, and that was like bread and butter industrial design, tried and true, CMF, the whole 9 yards. And then they
wow.
had attached to engineering their, what they call the advanced concepts group, or I think originally it was called advanced concept engineering, but it was all industrial designers. And so that was a team of four when I joined. I was the fourth. And I think they've since built that team out. Um, but I don't think they had ever had an App State intern at TTI before that. And so I had jumped into like the engineering side of the team, and the engineering side was more oriented around what they would call feasibility studies. And so it was less about the overall industrial design of like what something was going to go to market with, as much as it was, does this thing even work? Should we even go down this pathway? Is it really feasible that on the 12 volt or the 4 volt or the 18-volt platform, we build a tool that does X, Y, and Z? And some of the concepts got pretty nutty and kind of over the top, and like, we should definitely not make this. But that was the point of that team, was these kind of exploratory research projects. Um, and at the time, it was largely like really isolated research. Like there wasn't a lot of in-field research. It was mostly, you know, basically desk research and then just prototyping like crazy, 3D printing. They're, you know, using the shop to just build out the minimum viable product that had to demonstrate that this was a good idea, pitching those to marketing saying, yeah, there's a good opportunity for this. And then things would move forward to get a little bit engineered, and then eventually would go to the, you know, the real industrial designers, and they'd
Right.
make it pretty and take it to market, that kind of thing. So I was on this small engineering team, not the big at the time, which is now even bigger, industrial design team specifically.
Oh, interesting. So, like when you're doing this like feasibility exploration, like what was the feed in? What did the feed in for that look like? Are you just getting like I'm imagining like the way I'm imagining it in my head is like the output from a workshop where there's like 50 concepts, and then are you like combing through those 50 and testing every single one, or are you guys kind of like picking out the ones that feel the most realistic? I'm curious to ask just because like the last several years of my career, I've been doing a lot of these like exploration projects and front end work, and my career is starting to point a little more towards innovation. So I'm just curious to hear like a bit more about your experience with it.
Yeah, so I think the program saw a lot of growth while I was there. Like there were a lot of changes that happened while I was there. But the reality of things back then was that a lot of stuff was driven out of like water cooler chat that was just like, what if we, and
Oh,
then
wow.
some kind of crazy idea, or somebody from marketing or somebody from sales would come over and see like, everybody's asking for, you know, this thing or that thing. Like,
Interesting.
is that something that we could make? Is that even possible? And so a lot of times it was oriented around like the platform. Like, could we build something on the 4 volt platform instead of a 12-volt platform instead of an 18? You know, can we make it
Mhm.
hyper compact? Can we? And some of the ideas were really dumb. You know, everything was about, you know, can it have a laser? Like, yeah, of course it can have a laser. It was like,
Right.
can you show me? And things like that. So 1 second here. Someone's blowing up my phone, and I gotta mute over here.
Oh,
I
no
don't
worries.
I
I
don't know
have
if you could
a
hear it or not, but it's driving me crazy. So I gotta put myself on do
no,
not
no, no
disturb.
worries. It's not coming through on my end. It's funny.
Okay.
I remember hearing about that that whole era from my boss at Newell, Chris Park. He was telling us kind of there was an era there where he was at Irwin, and I guess there was like the introduction of the first laser level, and then that whole market just exploded. And I think it was like getting to the point where they were like designing laser levels on the plane on their way into China, and it was kind of there was like this big sprint at the time to like develop a ton of laser products. It seems like
Yeah.
that's all kind of gone away. I don't see almost any laser
Well, I
now
think just
outside of
the
levels.
yeah, the concept in general of like people jumping on these big bandwagon trends, I think still very much exists. I mean, like AI
Yeah.
is a perfect example of that, where everyone wants to be involved with AI right now. So I think it's just like we've shifted our focus to like other things, but overall, like lasers were really cool. Were they always useful? Like,
Right.
and I think that comes around to where a lot of the teams that we were tasked with investigating stuff often that was kind of dumb, but it was kind of jumping on the bandwagon. Like, how can we get to market really quickly and be a part of this, even if it wasn't on the scale of kind of the viral trends that we see today? But a lot of those things would come out of like marketing guy Joe was like, oh, you know, I really love this idea. I have this at home on my other thing, and I think we should put it in a. And it's almost like, have you seen those games where you like roll the dice and it's like, oh, it's a thing
Yes.
made out of this
Yep.
that does, you know, it felt like a lot of that sometimes. Like there weren't often really good origins about where those ideas came from. That's changed. That actually changed like while I was there. And a lot of the people on my team that were senior to me were advocating like, we need to be doing more research. We need to be actually spending time with users that are actually using the tools, and not just having them tell us what they want, but like observing them and, you know, kind of reading between the lines. And that was part of my migration to Milwaukee. Even though Milwaukee's a
Mm.
TTI brand developed separately, was that they did that. Like they were really deep on the user research and the ethnography and spending time on job sites and digging in really deeply into what are our users actually need and driving those concepts that they developed out of those rather than just like someone in marketing or someone in sales being like, it'd be kind of cool if we did, which can be true sometimes, but they can be hit or miss as well. So it just kind of backs it up with something a little bit more formal. And I know that since then they've migrated to more like established process in that regard.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it comes, I'm sure, with like maturization and like as that team grows and the business starts to recognize like the need and the value it's providing. I feel like that's kind of where, as a team, you can start advocating for yourselves a little bit more, like educating your stakeholders on the process and like building their kind of understanding of like, even, hey, that's a great idea. Here's like an even better way that we could do that.
Yeah.
Um, but that's interesting. So that kind of led you into Milwaukee, and I feel like this is where you and I started to have more contact, where I would send you emails and you would share these like really interesting stories about like engaging with customers on job sites. Was that like did you find yourself like adjusting your process or a lot kind of like changing with the way you viewed your job once you started getting on site
Yeah.
with
I mean,
contractors?
it was a big transition in both like my personal process as well as how I viewed design, because I think that there was definitely a certain level of arrogance like in school that like I'm an inventor, I can make things, like I can do stuff, I have good ideas. And I think the job at Milwaukee kind of taught me that like your ideas are built on a premise that is your worldview, right? That everything that I know about a hammer or a drill or and stuff like that comes from my use and my experience with that. And if I'm designing products for me, great. But most of us aren't designing products for me. We're designing products for our, target audience or, specific users within that. And we're missing a lot of the things that actually matter to those people when we don't actually involve them in the process. So that was a big kind of mental shift for me that like, oh, I can't often rely on my own kind of gut instinct about something. I can learn so much by spending even like an hour with somebody on a job site. Um, because people that do trades, like they come up with the most like intuitive and yet innovative ways to solve problems that you wouldn't even think are problems, but you do it 1,000 times a day and it's a problem. So they come up with really innovative stuff, and you could see that in the way that Milwaukee developed products. If you ever see like their equivalent of like a vice grip plier, and it has a little eyelet on the end that you can jam a screwdriver through, well, that's because guys on job sites were welding a nut onto the end of that screw and jamming their screwdriver through it. And it's like, well, why do you do that? It's like, well, so I can crank this down and get enough torque on it so it actually holds things in place, and they can do it quickly. It's like, that's a great idea. Why would we
That's
not do
amazing.
that? Why would we not just build that into a product? Like that screw is going to be there anyway. Why not just give it, a little eyelet on the end of it so that people can do that? And by doing that, Milwaukee also connected with the whole concept of like, hey, we're listening and we care. Like we're not just making products and throwing it out into the world. Like, here's how you have to use it. We're actually watching to see how you use your tools, observing that, and actually making things that make your life easier. So that was a huge kind of like a worldview shift in my brain of like how I do design and how I kind of gather information to make decisions that I'm still carrying through, in present day jobs. So, but it was also difficult at the same time, again, because of the ego thing of like, but I think I have a good idea. Like, no, go talk to somebody else first. Plus, I'm a little bit introverted. Actually, I'm a lot introverted. And going onto a job site where like dudes are pretty rough, especially like metal workers and stuff like that. Not
Right.
only are they pretty rough to work with already, but like if they find out that you're a little bit insecure, they will give you a hard time. So like a very junior level researcher on site wearing kind of stupid looking steel-toed shoes that don't have a single scuff on them and looking like an OSHA person with a camera and stuff like that, they'll give you a hard time. And so like getting into the mindset of like not letting that bother you, like jumping in on the banter and just like being a part of like the little community that they have was a big shift as well. Something that I feel a lot more natural at now, even if I'm in like something like fashion where I'm going into something like, I don't know like what this is all about, but I'm going to jump in on it. And I think that Milwaukee job really helped me kind of get over it, because you have to. There's like no other way around it.
Wow, that's yeah, that's amazing. Um, yeah, it's funny. I feel like it's not necessarily just an individual learning either. I see this with a lot of companies where a company will put out a product and they'll intend a use for it, and then they almost want to kind of like protect and guard that intention as opposed to having that like ability to adapt to their customer and like implement running changes or evolve over time. And it can kind of be a culture uh element to a certain degree as well.
Yeah, I mean it's a
Um,
hard lesson to learn as a company that like you can't always tell the user how they're supposed to use something. In fact, you can rarely do it. I think it was a big like Steve Jobs thing. He was like, you should basically tell people how to use things. Like
yeah,
to a certain extent, yeah, like when you need to be innovative and need to like kind of shift somebody's way of thinking. But the number of times that at a company like Milwaukee where we were like, oh, let's make this more durable, let's make it out of metal, and suddenly it becomes a hammer. It's like
right.
you have to think about things a little bit differently and make it hard to do stupid things, make it hard to do things that aren't smart. And some of that comes into the industrial design elements of like, your brand language and touch points always being like a certain color and consistency like that. But a lot of it also comes from, just recognizing that like people are going to use things how they feel like they should be used. So you have to basically guide them down the pathway that is the path of least resistance for them to get to their end goal. Otherwise, they're going to use your drill as a hammer or like whatever that kind of use case is.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I feel like the other thing that this is reminding me of um as you're kind of telling these stories is I forget that I think you're a good showcase for an industrial designer being more than one archetype. Like I think sometimes get the feeling like there's this certain profile that recruiters or hiring managers look for when bringing an industrial designer into their team, which is like a lot of hot sketching, like very strong aesthetic sensibilities. Kind of I don't know. I am having a hard time breaking it down off the top of my head at the end of a long day, but I think you kind of know what I'm getting at. Whereas you have this very hands-on approach, and I think you've told me this before, but as far as your process when you're operating within this team, it tends to be a lot of like very hands-on prototyping and a little bit you're leaning a little bit less on kind of like that sketching component of the process. Could you like speak a little bit to that? Because I actually
Yeah.
don't know too much of like the details.
Yeah, I think there's space for both. Obviously, like there's not one right and one wrong. There's a time and place for each one. And I think that is something that I felt like even within school. I remember one of my classmates in particular told me that like if you can't sketch, you're never going to get a job. And I can visually communicate. I'm not amazing at sketching though, but I can write down an idea quick enough to communicate to somebody what I need or want or kind of want to do. And it doesn't fit that mold. And I think that for me, there's an element of like that traditional tried and true industrial design that can often be neglectful of the kind of concept research side of things. Like we weren't really taught research in school. We were taught come up with a cool idea through a death of a thousand cuts with sketches. If you do 1,000 sketches, eventually you'll find the right idea. And I recognize now that I'm older and more mature that like there's a part of that is like learning process through repetition that you wouldn't necessarily approach design like that. But so many students actually did carry that forward into their career where they'd start a project by going, okay, well, what do I need to do? Well, like I'll just start sketching out ideas. And my process that I learned through this kind of concept and research path was, well, think about maybe more of the bigger picture about who's going to use this and what problem it's going to solve, and then start going and talking to people. Like we did in school, we did surveys and we sent them to our family members and stuff like that. Like, I don't know if your family member really cares all that much about utility knives or,
Right.
dish racks or whatever we were designing and stuff like that. Like maybe go talk to people that use this more often and that may, have a closer connection to the product or the problem that you're trying to solve. And you might even find that the problem is not even the problem you thought it was originally, and you may have to kind of pivot on that. And that flexibility and that plasticity in the process was one that I learned through this kind of concept path. So, and that's the one that I've adopted even as I've migrated more into things like fashion and AI, is that if we develop product outside of the context of humans, it's kind of meaningless, right? We can build really cool things or really pretty things, but for them to actually have some sort of meaning and some sort of impact, they need the human element. And so a lot of my first part of the process is like, okay, where are the humans in this, and how can I involve them in the process, whether it's by getting feedback, by actually spending time with them, for more recent projects, understanding like what's your perception of this technology, and what scares you about it, and how do you feel about it, and kind of going down those pathways to develop product that is going to, at a base level, address the human needs of things as a kind of forefront of why we're building it or how we're building it. And for stuff like software especially, you may need to redesign something from the ground up to incorporate a human element. And so that's something that having that up front can make a huge difference down the line.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I'm really curious to hear about what you're doing now, especially with all the conversation around AI. But I don't want to skip too far ahead. Maybe before we get there, you were also at GoPro, which I think is really compelling. So I'm and also is like a significantly different industry than power tools, I would imagine. So how did GoPro come about?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of those things where like I feel like this entire career journey is just this one kind of ironic long story. So the same connections that I had built at TTI years prior, when I took the job at Milwaukee, I was having a lot of trouble leaving TTI. I really liked the job there. I really liked the people I was working with. I didn't hate the area in terms of like where I was living. I had joined a sailing club, like all this kind of stuff. I was learning new things, having a really good time. And I was like, but my career path, this could like escalate my career path to go to Milwaukee. And it did. I was less happy with living in Milwaukee. I don't like the cold as much, that kind of stuff. And so it ended up being less of a good fit there. But right around the time that I moved to Milwaukee, a job at GoPro popped up. And I was a GoPro fan since college, like when they released their original HD Hero and stuff like that. And I'd been using them since then. And so I was a big fan. At the time, I think they had a really, really tiny team. And they needed a senior industrial designer. And I was like, I want this job so bad, but I think they need somebody more skilled than me. In hindsight, I probably should have just gone for it and tried to see what would happen. But my alternative pathway, and again, not realizing that this would come around exactly as I kind of like dreamed it would, but I recommended a friend for the job. I said, I can't take this job. You should take this job. And I was, a couple months in at Milwaukee, and I got a phone call from him, and he was like, "Hey, I got the job." And I was like, what are you talking about? He's like, "The job at GoPro." I was like, "Oh, no way." So he ended up going to GoPro, started establishing the team there, eventually ended up recruiting another individual from the TTI group to go to GoPro. And then there was this kind of joke, like, we just need to bring Brian along, like, and it's the whole crew. We're all back together again. Well, fast forward about 2 years, and I was ready for the next thing, and Milwaukee was doing some organizational shifts. I had been basically downsized out of the team along with a large portion of their concept team. And I was looking for something else. And they were like, well, come out here. It's the obvious choice. And as intimidating as it was, like went through the interview process. It took a long time. California company hiring somebody from outside California at the time was like, how could we ever? Um,
Oh
but
wow. Why is
yeah,
that?
at the time, and I don't think it's as much, but it's still there. There's this idea that I have to remember this is recorded. So I gotta like
Oh
meter
sure.
what I say because I think that like some of this is kind of stupid. Um, but there's this mentality that like the best talent comes from California. There's a lot of
Ah,
amazing talent that comes from California, but certainly not all of it comes from California. And so there's just this mentality that if we can recruit from Stanford, why would we recruit from App
right.
State, right? Who's
Right.
even heard of App State before? And it really actually helped to have some former coworkers there that were like, I went to a North Carolina school. I work with these people. Everything is
Mhm.
fine. Like apply for it. But there were still barriers with HR. Like, oh, well, don't you want a like a more qualified person? And they were like, look, this person does what we do and has been doing it and can contribute to the team. Like this is who we want. And I still had to be, competitive with the other people that they were looking to hire and things like that. But it all ended up basically working out that I was the best candidate for the position that they had, because I was doing work with the team that I had previously done work with. Like, they knew my
Right.
work in and out. They knew that I got an additional experience at Milwaukee that even they didn't have at the time, that I could bring that to the team. And so it was a very natural, I think, migration in terms of a job. It was not as natural moving to California and going from having like a moderate to moderate low paying job to like California, and like the salaries feel amazing, and then you get there and you realize rent is $3,500 a month, and it's like, oh, what did I do? Did I ask for too little? Like all those different things. That was like more of a major jump. But integrating with the team at GoPro was like, I don't even know what like the illustration for it is. Like, I mean, it was certainly a dream job of mine, but it just like fit like a glove. Like, got there, I interviewed for the position with prototypes. Like, I came in and I emptied a backpack on the table and I was like, here's some ideas I have. One of those was basically the equivalent of what ended up being the Karma Grip, stabilizer. Not that like my idea became that, like they were already working on stuff like that, and I showed up with a prototype that was equivalent of like what their team was already doing, having no knowledge of them actually working on those things. So it ended up just being like a really great fit. Jumped in on a product I was already passionate about, and I started kind of as a mounts and accessories concept designer, and then kind of expanded out into different concepts of even like software mock-ups and like what could we do with this or that, or camera architecture, um, you know, even helping out with like launch events. So the Hero 5 launch, I was a part of the launch event as like a product expert for helping influencers like figure out how to use the camera. And I think it does come back to that like connection with the users. I've always been really connected with the users and the people that are using it. So I was able to speak to, well, we made this for you. This makes this easier and this makes that easier. And here's why this design decision was made, so that when you are scuba diving or skateboarding or all these different things, like it makes it more beneficial in this regard. So that was a really natural job change for me, in terms of the actual kind of work that I was doing, more concept work, more research. Obviously, the research was quite a bit more fun than a job site. Like, one of my first projects at GoPro was they were like, does anyone know how to scuba dive? We need to test some stuff underwater. And I was like, I have my scuba diving license. Put me in, coach. And so I think it was like my second week at GoPro. I spent the week scuba diving in the Monterey Bay. So that
That's
was,
amazing.
yeah, pretty fantastic. So and
Yeah, that's
obviously
great.
everybody at GoPro is kind of like on that level of like loves the outdoors, is into, kind of adventure, action, travel, sports, that kind of thing. So just meeting all sorts of really cool people and getting to be involved in like all the projects that are going on there, it was like one of my favorite jobs that I've ever had ever. So
That's awesome. And it's crazy to think that you think the Hero 5 launch event, what are they on now? Is it the Hero 12 or the Hero
12.
13?
No,
12.
12 was the I guess the most recent, what is September, October-ish launch. I can't remember because I still get cameras from them. So I
Nice.
get an early release camera. Um, not as a part of anything job related, but I'm still involved with like their social media, like influencer program and stuff like that. So
That's awesome. Yeah, and it's funny too. I didn't even think about it, but it does make sense. I mean, the GoPro camera is basically a tool. It is this thing that is being repurposed essentially by these creators, these people who are wanting to take them. And I think at that time, at least thinking back to around that era, there was a lot of like hacking, like consumer hacking as well with the GoPro, where
yeah,
people
ton of
were
it.
like building things out of PVC pipe, and you could read all of these kind of like instructables about building different GoPro mounts. So it seems like, yeah, basically what you said, it does fit like a glove. It's like that perfect mesh of taking the job site,
Mhm.
but doing it in a way more fun way.
Well, and I was a big part of those communities prior to working at GoPro. Like, one of the hardest things was that as I got involved in development at GoPro, I actually had to step away from those communities because
Right.
there's kind of an element of being too close. Like, if I was to, say that I worked for GoPro, and you know, and I'm really interested in this thing that you're working on, it opens up, some legal issues and stuff like that. So I had to step away from those communities, but obviously got to step into the actual development of the product. So yeah, it was really great experience overall. Obviously, they went through some hard times. I was in their like fourth or fifth round of hard times by the time I
Yeah.
left. Um, And so, unfortunate, but a good experience overall.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm kind of keeping an eye on the time here. I want to be respectful of your time, given that it's kind of late here. I'm really curious to hear more about what you're doing now. I know you're. Here's what I know. I know you're at an AI company, and I know you've been there for a few years, and that's it. So I'm just curious,
Yeah.
like you were kind of there before this like boom that we've seen in I don't know what the last year, 2 years or so. So like I guess, yeah, what was it like coming in, and then what has it been like going through that transition of there's not a lot of interest in AI now, there's like a massive influx of AI.
Yeah, I mean, again, kind of a crazy story to go along with that. So when I left GoPro, and I say that like I left GoPro, like GoPro had significant downsizing, cut almost 50% of their workforce at the time. I was multiple rounds in, but still like devastated that I had to leave a job like that. And I was in the Bay Area, and I was like, what do I do next? And like many designers, I was like, I'm going to start my own thing. I'm going to just like start consulting and, putting my ideas out there, and had a little bit of trouble getting started because it's tough. Like you're basically doing two jobs at that point. You're doing your own, design work, and then you've got to market yourself and you've got to do sales effectively. Ended up getting connected with a company that did a lot of contract work, design and innovation work for Miller Coors Brewing Company. So some of their like fan experiences and stuff like that. So I was doing a lot of that and just doing like consulting research and product development largely for Miller Coors through this innovator. Um, Not the happiest like in terms of like what I was doing there in terms of like passion and fulfillment and stuff like that. So I was actively looking for other stuff. I had at the time interviewed at game companies. I had interviewed at Microsoft and had an active offer on the table from Microsoft at the time for completely unrelated stuff, doing like basically internal development for product internally. Um, and I had a bunch of options on the table. And a coworker from the Miller Coors work actually reached out to me, and she was like, "Hey, I got this job at a fashion company, and we just got a new coffee maker. It'd be great to catch up. I think you like really like what we're doing." And I was like, "Yeah, I mean, like, why not? I'm looking for something else. I've had really great success with networking. I'm gonna go grab coffee with her." And so I went over there. It wasn't too far from where I was living at the time. I went over to their office and, obviously got to see the coffee maker, got a cup of coffee, and then was basically gawking at one of the computers that was sitting on one of the desks, because it was just this behemoth of a computer with 4 GPUs and, just like, what do you do with that? Like that is an incredible amount of power. And she was like, "Oh, that's so and so's computer. He's going to be here later today. You should ask him." And so we chit chatted for a little bit over coffee. And then this individual came in and she was like, "Hey, by the way, Brian, wants to know what you do with the computer." And he was like, "Oh, well, I'll show you." And he started showing me some of the stuff that he was working on. And the stuff that he was showing me was the view model product of View AI, which is effectively generating clothing on models without the two being in the same room together. And I was like, "Ooh, I can see the use case for this. Like, I can really see how photography and things like that become, a pretty significant barrier to getting product on model. And there's a benefit to product on model. It's context, it's sizing, it's, draping and things like that. Like, there's a lot of value there." And we ended up chatting for like 3 hours. Meanwhile, my former coworker's like, "Thanks for having coffee," like, just jokingly, but letting us kind of nerd out over computers and how does AI work. And I went into kind of research mode of like, I didn't realize there was this element of AI. Like I always viewed AI as like a chat bot. And here I have AI that's generating imagery. That's cool. And this was at this point over 4 years ago. AI that generates imagery. This is really cool. And I can see where this could go. Like I can mentally visualize that this could be a big thing. And so closed up that conversation, thanked my former coworker, told her like we'd have to get coffee some other time because I feel really bad. Basically took the elevator down, walked out to my car and sat in my car and texted her and said, "I don't know if there's ever a chance that you would want to hire somebody like me, but if it ever comes up, just let me know." And she goes, "Actually, he just said the same thing." And I was like,
Oh, that's
"Yeah,
awesome.
that could be cool." Well, I look up this person. He's the co-founder. And
Oh, wow.
I had no idea the entire time. I thought he was just like one of the engineers and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Um, so we chatted a little bit directly about like how could this make sense and stuff like that. At the time, I wasn't happy with the offer from Microsoft, and I had pushed them back like, I'm not going to move to Seattle based on this. Like, we've got to figure something else out here that would work better. They came back with another offer, and I was like, I really need to entertain that. And so I went back and was like, hey, I've got this offer from Microsoft. Is there any chance that there's something here? And he was like, I think there definitely is. Will you come in tomorrow and just have a serious conversation with our chief of product? Um, Basically got an offer coming out of that meeting, and I think started a couple days later. Um, and so it was just this gut feeling about like, okay, I've seen like the underbelly of AI stuff in a way that I had never seen it before. And not only that, but the person that I was talking to had been able to teach me about it, which is a big thing for me in jobs. Is like, I always want to be learning. Always want to be kind of pushed in growth. And that was one thing I was not getting out of like the Miller Coors projects. It was like I was contributing like the best thing to it, and I couldn't really give or get feedback from other people on the team because they didn't do what I did. It was like, not that I was the smartest person in the room, but for like what I was doing, I was the one that knew how to do that. And there was nowhere to go with that. And it was like, okay, there's this potential not only with AI and this technology and like where this could go, but I have such a good opportunity to learn about something that now that I've seen it, I think really could be something in the future. And so I joined the team. Like a month later, we had our first like company offsite in India. Fish out of water. Everyone's like, "Oh, what programming languages do you know?" Like none. Stuff like that. Well, how long have you been in AI? No, no years. I'm an industrial designer. And the question then was like, why did we hire you? And my boss, the co-founder, was basically like, just chill. I know we're gonna find a use for him. And then COVID started, and all of a sudden, photo studio shut down, and people couldn't get
Oh,
access to
wow.
models, and the supply chain was disrupted and couldn't get access to product samples. And basically, everyone and their sister was like, "What do we do? Hey, AI could maybe solve this." And so our growth that first year in terms of interest and stuff like that went through the roof, to the point that it was like, how can we handle this? How can we make this better for like what this needs to be? Which eventually turned into like, how much time have we spent with photo studios? How much time have we spent with fashion brands to understand like what their process is? And the answer was none. We made a cool technology product, hoping that we could eventually find a problem to solve with it, with an idea of like, this is how this works. And then I did my first on-site photo shoot with a company, and was just baffled at how difficult the process was, and tedious and expensive, and the number of people involved. And it was able to kind of transform the way that we developed that product to make it more pointed, to be better for what they need. And not only that, but to be collaborative with them. Like a big concern with AI these days is, well, is this hijacking people's jobs? Is this going to be like a replacement strategy? And that's what everyone hates about the concept of AI. We've built our product as like, you're the one driving this, you the photographer, you the creative director, the stylist, all these things. Like, we want you to have a part in this tool. We just don't want everyone to have to be in the room to create the photo. And that goes for models as well, in terms of like licensing and likeness and stuff like that. Like, nobody bothered to talk to them to see how they feel about AI. And if you saw an announcement, I guess it was the beginning of the year with Levi's, they made a big announcement that they were going to replace some models with AI to get better diversity. And they're like, the public was basically saying,
Right.
well, you're going to be more inclusive by excluding the actual people from the process. That doesn't make any sense. And I was there at that event, and I just want to be like, we're not doing that. We're doing like the opposite of that. We want models involved. We pay models. Like, we've developed completely different because we spent a ton of time with models on site and like listened to their concerns. So my experience with like research and design all of a sudden became very relevant to AI development, and to a concept now. The buzzword around it is digital transformation. Well, everyone wants to use AI, but how? How should we do this?
Mm.
How should we get to a place where we're using data more effectively and ethically and equitably? And what does that look like in terms of developing a product? So my current role is basically directing R&D for new initiatives and new projects, new stuff that we develop, as well as the digital transformation side of things with customers and potential customers who are going, okay, I think I want to do this, but I don't want to be a press article about how bad we did this. Like, how do I avoid this? And because we're not, a startup that started 3 months ago using stable diffusion, we've got patents from like 2017 and stuff like that. Because we have that longevity in the market, we've had the chance to fail and make, terrible imagery and, make stuff that didn't work, and find out what models hated about our product, to develop those things and kind of structure a system that is already kind of ready for what's happening now. So that product that we have for generating imagery, that's just one facet of what we do. And just in the last month or so, we've actually kind of merged our enterprise solutions with our retail solutions under the View AI umbrella. So we have basically the full gamut of what we're calling AI orchestration, where you can bring yours, you can use ours, you can basically kind of plug all the pipes together, and kind of create the product that you need for your company to kind of solve your use case. So a lot of like what I'm doing these days is kind of guiding companies along that pathway of how do I get my company from, pen and paper to digitized data to actioning on that data, and doing it the right way and doing it the smart way. So that's largely what I'm involved in now. Very, very far piece from Power Tools.
Wow, that's amazing. I have to imagine that there's a lot of change and pivoting that you have to keep up with, between both sides. Like on one half, you're in a startup, which naturally has a lot of change and pivoting, and then on the other half, you have AI, which is like evolving and growing so rapidly that even me, who is like this very ancillary participant, like I even have a really hard time keeping up with the tools that are just only meant for this like narrow thing that I do, that is industrial design. Um, do you guys just do you not worry about that as much because you kind of have this focus in terms of like a business proposition and yeah, an established customer base? So do you not have to keep up with those changes as much, or is that still a challenge?
I mean, I think it's still particularly important to stay up with things. And I can definitely say, like, from my role, leading R&D projects for new initiatives is really difficult. Like, I'm involved in AI stuff every single day, 8+ hours a day. And I feel like I glance away for a second and somebody's got something new. Somebody's done something that, like, oh, we should have thought of that. That's such a good idea to do things that way, or, to implement it for, a different purpose, that kind of thing. So there is certainly the need to try to keep up with things, but at the same time, I think with a product like AI-based tools, there is a huge difference between what you see in a paper, like a research paper where somebody's demonstrating the feasibility of a technology, and that product making it to market in a meaningful and usable way. And I think on-model imagery is a really good example of that, because I can go into Stable Diffusion or Midjourney, or a lot of these other tools, and I can say, generate me an image that looks like this and is wearing this and stuff like that. That's not good enough in fashion. It has to be the product with the exact features, with that exact zipper. It can't be a different color. It has to be that exact zipper, that exact cuff style, neckline, all these other elements. Like, those are critical. And even more so with models. Like, people cast models because of the way they look. They can't all of a sudden have an extra finger or eyes that are, slightly off, where they should be, and stuff like that. So there's a big difference between saying, like, oh, we just released this product and it does this cool thing. Like, you have to actually be able to be usable in the industry. And that's really hard. It's really, really hard. A lot of it comes down to data issues. You may have, like, oh, we demonstrated that you can do this thing with this one, like, perfect set of data. And if you try to do anything outside that set of data, it's completely inflexible. You can't use anything from anywhere else. Or maybe you have a really good data set and it's completely disorganized, unstructured. It's just basically a pile of files, or, whatever that is. And that's an exercise of, like, okay, well, you need to go through a transformation first of transforming your data before you can even use a tool like someone else is suggesting. So there's a balance of, like, there's tons and tons of hype in AI right now. There's a lot of really cool stuff being done in AI right now. Some of it is very usable. Some of it is, it's a concept and it could take years for it to get places. Maybe a good example is stuff with, like, Chat GPT. We never expected that it would be able to do the stuff that it does. And it's weirdly impressive how it does some of that stuff. But there are still elements where a lot of people are like, oh, well, Chat GPT could easily do this or that. It's like, right, in that one context where it did give you the right answer, but the reliability of that answer, it's really at the whim of the combination of words that you put in. I mean, at the end of the day, it's a language model. It deals with words. So you do your words differently, and all of a sudden you get a wrong answer or something completely hallucinated. Is that acceptable? Is that usable? How do you prevent that from happening? And so, there's elements of that again, like nobody ever expected Chat GPT to be so good at like suggesting stuff for code. And it's amazingly good at stuff like that. So that's one use case where it's like, oh, wow, this is really good. But you still have to test out that code. You probably still want to run that through, an engineer that actually knows how to code, to have them vet that, because you don't want it like throwing something in that it scraped off of some website that maybe is not as trustworthy. So, it's strong and weak at the same time, and the actual viability of that in the use case can vary greatly. So, like I said, a little bit of balance of like, there's tons of hype, there's really great stuff happening, some of it's really great, but actually getting to market with a usable product that, a company, a large company or a large fashion brand or somebody like that is going to use, that's very different from, say, a small brand who just simply doesn't have access to a photo studio and wants to kind of create cool images that kind of look like their product, but maybe not, completely their product. Like the use cases are different there. And it's a lot harder to get a product that is kind of fully mature and able to be leveraged in a very consistent and very reliable way. So I think that's like the major difference there, but still really hard to keep up with everything.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think I'm gonna wrap up here, Brian. It's I can't believe an hour has like flown by already. But one thing that is really interesting that I just want to comment on really quick that I think is a big takeaway that I'm having is it seems like all throughout your career there's been these I can't think of a better word for it than trends, but like large hype bubbles, right? There we talked about like the laser levels in the beginning. GoPro, obviously there was like that big action camera boom. And then now you're of course doing this work with AI, which is the boom we're experiencing at the moment. And I think what's like really inspiring to me is you always seem to like really maintain focus throughout all of those waves and really kind of keep like the problem at the forefront, the customer at the forefront, the brand that you're working under. And it seems like you do like this amazing job of kind of like resisting, not necessarily like resisting the trends, but finding like the right applications within each of them. And I think that is like a really um motivating thing to hear and like a positive thing to hear because it is so easy as designers to just kind of like, okay, this is happening, like we need to quickly adapt or we need to make money or I need to like ensure my role within this business or whatever it is that it kind of like causes people to like really latch onto these trends. And I don't know, it's just maybe I'm getting a little tired, but it's just I think there's a lot of value there and kind of like understanding your journey and understanding like how you've kind of navigated all these zigs and zags over the course of your career. Um,
Yeah, I
just
mean,
to wind down
I
here.
appreciate
Oh,
that as a comment. I really do appreciate that. I wish I could say like it's been entirely intentional, but like we talked about at the beginning, I think there's a certain amount of luck and a certain amount of like planning that like I hope some things would happen, but also kind of the open mindedness that I learned really early on of like I don't have all the answers, even if I wish I did. Being kind of open and more observant, or like I've always described myself as like I'm definitely like a spongy person. I'm more inclined to listen to somebody talking than to talk. Maybe not in the case of a podcast, but I try to be that person that's like absorbing more than I'm putting out there. And I think that is also played into kind of like the overall career that um, if I've tried to be kind of like an outset within these trends, like I'm still trying to pick up on the trends, but trying to push for the truth in those trends and kind of what makes real true sense and like what's going to last maybe longer than the hype boom of lasers and action cameras and AI as well, that maybe not necessarily that this is going to be a bubble that pops, but at some point there's going to be some easing and some slowing and some maturation, and stuff like that. So uh, just trying to kind of like see what's next and kind of plan for that future, even if it's a little bit luck, it's a little bit chance, that kind of stuff.
that's awesome. Well, I can't I would not be able to have a better note to end on than that. If people want to get in touch with you, Brian, what's the best way for folks to reach out?
Yeah, I think the easiest thing is LinkedIn. Unfortunately, like when COVID hit, I basically disappeared off of social media. It's one of those things where like I didn't feel like I had anything to contribute to the conversation at the time, and I just didn't want to flap my gums. So LinkedIn is really kind of the best place to find me if you want to like chit chat, like work stuff or anything like that. I am on social media, but very rarely I don't post, so there's nothing to follow there. So yeah, definitely on LinkedIn.
Perfect. Okay. Well, Brian Harris at LinkedIn. I definitely encourage people to reach out and yeah, get in touch with Brian because I feel like every time I talk with you, there's some insight or some quote or there's something that sticks in my brain that I end up taking with me through my career. So really appreciate your time and yeah, have a great night, Brian.
Yeah, thanks for the time. I appreciate the chat.